This program was made possible by funding from the University of Central Florida's Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies.
You see, a cattleman would see nothing wrong in grazing this land. And cattle, in terms of acreage affected, have done more environmental damage in this country than anything else.
What this is the Drive Prairie ecosystem. It's an endemic prairie ecosystem. There's no other prairie in the world like it. It's here in Florida. We've lost about 80% of it in the last 40 years.
Hello. I'm Linda Chapin with the University of Central Florida. Welcome to Naturally Central Florida, a series of 7 programs about the unique and beautiful places in our Florida landscape. Many of these places are in danger of disappearing to subdivisions, bulldozers, shopping malls. And so a group of citizens, environmentalists, and business people have come together in an effort to try and save some of these beautiful places. Today we're going to take you to the Kissimmee Prairie, which stretches across Central Florida from the Atlantic Ocean to the spine of Florida down the center of the state. It contains some of our most valuable natural resources, like the Butler chain of lakes in the north and the headwaters of the St. Johns River in the southern part. Some of us remember when this part of our region was all about cattle and cowboys. That's been the tradition of the Kissimmee Prairie since Spanish settlers introduced the horse to the New World way back in the 16th century. This area was almost entirely agricultural, mostly cattle ranches, until Walt Disney World opened nearby. That's when a building boom started, which is continuing today and accelerating. All of this growth and development is a challenge to a giant ecosystem of prairie, marshlands, pine flats, and oak hammocks. It threatens the most valuable bald eagle nesting area outside of Alaska. And it can wipe out natural lands where generations of families have gone to hunt and fish and camp and hike. Naturally Central Florida's Alicia Callanan Mandigo talks to someone who can educate us about why this area is so important.
Take a good look. This is something you probably didn't realize existed in Florida. Maybe you're thinking, well, that's just good old Florida scrub. But it's not.
What this is the Drive Prairie ecosystem. It's an endemic prairie ecosystem. There's no other prairie in the world like it. It's here in Florida. We've lost about 80% of it in the last 40 years. And so it's really nice that we were able to conserve at least this one tract. There's other tracts of it south of here. This is part of the great Kissimmee Prairie ecosystem. And the common name is a grassland. And as you can see on the ground, there's a lot of grass growing here. So this is a grassland, it's an upland. But that's a different kind of prairie. This is prairie in the true sense of the word. It's an upland plant community. It's dominated by grasses and forbs. It's only knee-high, as you can see. And the funny thing about prairies is this is an old growth ecosystem, just as much as a redwood forest. And just because it's short, people don't always appreciate that.
Just as the great Midwestern prairies are considered the heartland of America, these prairies are the heartland of Florida. These were the hunting grounds for Seminole Indians as recently as 40 years ago. These were the grazing lands for Florida's pioneer cattlemen. They were the observation grounds for naturalists of more than a century ago. It is here that some of Florida's most unique and endangered species have lived and gone extinct. And it is here that vital tropical rains begin their journey toward the great Florida Everglades. Lightning is common here, resulting in an ecosystem that is heavily fire dependent.
All these plants live under the ground and they only send up expendable shoots.
Okay.
And so these palmettos here, if you were to dig this up, there's a great big palmetto underneath the ground that won't be harmed by fire.
I can kind of see.
Yeah, you can see the trunk of it. And all the prairie plants are like that. And what we've ended up with is an ecosystem that has a higher plant diversity. We have about 1 to 200 plants per acre out here, which is a higher plant diversity than anywhere in North America except for about 2 other places.
So show us one of these old oak trees that you're talking about that grow in the ground, because I'm really not
Okay.
grasping this.
Okay. What we have here, we're standing in the top of an oak tree.
Okay.
And if you look, see the little acorns right here?
Yes, I do.
Now this oak tree is only, as you can see, it's only 3 feet tall.
Okay.
And this is called a runner oak. And the reason they call it a runner oak is because if you were to pull this stem up, it would be hooked by a runner to this stem, and by a runner to this stem, and by a runner to this stem. And actually, if you look over here, here's more stems. Here's more stems.
So this is all the same tree?
This is all one tree.
And this is as tall as he gets?
Yes. And what it does is this is, and actually the oak tree goes over there for another 30 or 40 feet. And so what you have is an oak tree that's just as big around as the normal oaks that we think of in our backyard. It's 60 feet in diameter, but the whole tree is underneath the ground.
And why does it grow this way?
Well, it's because of the fire. With the fires coming across all the time, we can burn off this expendable part. But if you looked underneath the ground, what you would see is the crown of the tree is all underneath the ground in a root system, and it has big tap roots that go down to make the main trunk of the tree. But this is a fire adaptation, and these trees produce acorns at a rate that's comparable to the big tall trees we're used to.
It's fascinating the way the prairie grows, but what grows here may someday prove to be vitally important, further underscoring the need to preserve these ecosystems.
Here in Florida, we have a lot of biodiversity, and a lot of these plants out here, like these palmettos, they pick the palmetto berries. They're still a very active industry, and they use it to treat prostate conditions in humans. And there's also grass out here, which I don't see right here. It's called toothache grass, and if you chew on it, it numbs your gums.
I think I've heard of it.
And with hundreds and hundreds of plant species, no telling all the things that may be out here that we haven't really figured out how to use yet.
As individual plants quietly wait out here for their potential medicinal properties to be discovered, they provide critical habitat to some of Florida's key bird populations, like the sandhill crane and the crested caracara.
We have the Florida grasshopper sparrow, which is one of Florida's most endangered birds. There may only be about 700 left in the whole state. This is one of the 3 spots where they occur, and they have to have this palmetto prairie. They cannot live in wooded areas. They can't live in, sometimes we plow the prairies under and plant things like bahia grass. They can't live there.
You had mentioned that you were going to try to show us a different portion of the prairie that we're going to need to take a little drive to go check that out. So
Right.
let's go ahead and move over on this way.
Yeah, there's lots to see.
The prairie is not considered a recharge area. The ground here is a hard pan soil that doesn't easily absorb water. Instead, during the rainy season, it collects on the surface, forming areas of seasonal wetlands.
Okay, right behind us we have the palmetto, and the palmetto is whenever you see palmetto out here, that's the driest part of the prairie.
Okay.
And we talked about this being a dry prairie ecosystem, and where we're standing right now is actually a wetland. And all through this whole region, it's very flat. There's a whole bunch of ponds and wetlands and sloughs. And this place, in a typical year, would be flooded for about 3 to 4 months. We get about 2/3 of our rain during the 4 summer months. And when we get all that rain, the whole dry prairie fills up. And part of the reason it fills up with water is because underneath the soil out here, there's a hard pan soil layer. And when the rain falls on the surface, it has to run off sideways. And that runoff goes into wetlands like this. And then this wetland is connected by sloughs, and it goes to the big chain of lakes. It goes to the Kissimmee River. It feeds Lake Okeechobee. It feeds the Everglades. And so the water that lands on this landscape is run sideways, and we use it for human drinking water. There's a lot of communities that get their water off surface flows. We use it to irrigate. It keeps our lakes full of water. And so these big prairie ecosystems are places where we can store water. Basically, when a drop of water lands in this little pond right here, since this is an undrained landscape, it may take a month or 2 months or even 6 months before it even gets down to the lake.
So this would be a Florida reservoir.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big, flat, shallow reservoir.
Established in 1995, the Kissimmee State Prairie Preserve, about 90 square miles, is the state's largest remaining block of prairie. Nearly 90% of the state's original prairies are now gone, and development pressures are increasing by the day. It's estimated Osceola County will need to build more than 200,000 homes over the next 25 years. Building those homes and keeping the prairie intact is going to be tough. Land on the south side of the preserve has already fallen victim to development plans.
Oh, and here's the lemon bacopa. You break that up and you can smell it. And smell,
Wow.
Yeah.
Very Very powerful.
Yeah.
It smells really good.
Yeah, and apparently people make tea out of it.
Okay. For centuries, the prairie's plants have been sources of food and medicine. Its sloughs and ponds help to cleanse the water we eventually drink. But most important, it's teeming with wildlife.
We are a bridge for animals. Basically, we used to have wolves here, we used to have panthers, we used to have bears, you know, these very far-ranging animals. The crested caracara, as I mentioned to you, and the sandhill cranes, they travel back and forth here.
They come here looking for the most abundant species the prairie has to offer, frogs.
And if you think about that, if you're a frog in Florida, you're this big, you're a little tree frog. If you sit down at night and make a list of all things that want to eat you, you've had a terrible night, because all the small mammals eat you, a whole bunch of the birds, the wading birds and hawks and even grackles and blue jays and things like that eat you. The big praying mantises eat these little frogs. And the frogs, yeah, and the frogs eat each other. Salamanders eat them, fish eat them, snakes eat them. And so frogs are one of the most abundant animals out here. They're also eaten by about 2/3 of the ecosystem, and they're critically important to the health of this ecosystem.
The prairie is important to Florida's history, and it's important to its future. Currently, it is one of the few places in Florida in which you won't hear any sound of modern life, and it is uniquely Florida.
And this is something that you just can't find anywhere else. And when you come out to the prairie, you can find all these species of plants and all the birds, and you can find wetlands, and these wetlands are, you know, we're standing really in the Everglades right now, even though we're 150 miles from the Everglades proper, but this water is headed for the Everglades, it's headed for Okeechobee, it's headed for the famous Kissimmee River system. We're part of one of the most famous ecosystems in the world. So hopefully in a future Florida, we won't have wrecked all this, and we will have left it connected enough to keep these places healthy and vibrant with all the different kinds of animals and plants and birds and things.
Thanks, Alicia. One important element of this part of the state is the Kissimmee River, which ought to serve as a reminder of how, with the best of intentions, we can make mistakes that will take many years and millions of dollars to correct. In the 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers turned the river into a 56-mile-long ditch to move water quickly, and it had a terrible impact on the Everglades. Now we're spending $600 million to restore part of the river to its original state. We'll tell you more about the Kissimmee Prairie when we return. Right now, there are huge mega developments proposed for this part of Osceola County. Officials there say that they want to concentrate growth in the northern part of the county in order to prevent sprawl in the southern part. We can ask our elected leaders to protect the land as much as possible, but we should also be looking for ways to set some of it aside so that future generations can understand the wonderful heritage of this part of our state. One family who has lived in this part of Osceola County for many years has made the work of protecting this natural area and sharing it a special mission. Alicia tells us why.
As a 10th-generation cattleman, Dr. Bill Broussard doesn't take the land lightly. He grew up on the back of a horse, planning to take the reins of the family ranch, because this is where he most likes to be.
My father's the one who convinced me to go to medical school back when I was in grade school.
He didn't think you should be a rancher?
What he said was, and how right he turned out to be, he says, ranching is pretty good right now, but he said, I think down the road you're not going to make a very good living ranching. And he was completely right.
So Broussard is a doctor and a rancher. His own children grew up here just as he did, but one in particular, his son, embraced the land in a different way. He didn't see pasture land, he saw critical ecosystems.
Margaret, my wife, and I had a son named Alan, and Alan seemed to be born with an understanding of nature. From the time he could barely walk, he was interested in the things that were growing up around him. And he followed that wish through college. He got a degree in biology. Before he got his start in college, however, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease and was treated for it successfully. And he went off to college, did very well. And he was doing a research project between college and graduate school when he had a massive heart attack, which apparently was caused by the treatment for Hodgkin's disease. While he was in the hospital waiting for his heart transplant, I'd go up there and visit him every weekend. And over the Thanksgiving weekend, we had a lot of time to talk. And he started talking about this land that we're looking at right now.
Which he grew up here.
He grew up here, but we didn't own this side. We owned the ranch side, but not what we call our conservation project. And he asked me if I couldn't do something to try to save this land. And so I promised him just 6 or 8 weeks before he died that I'd do my best to save this.
This is the land adjacent to the Broussard Ranch, and this is what Alan Broussard felt so strongly had to be saved. It's a view Bill Broussard now shares.
Yeah, I've been interested enough to learn everything I could about the systems. And the state of Florida recognizes 12 ecosystems in Florida, and we have 10 of the ecosystems on this property. So it's really fortunate with the diversity that we have here. I wish all of it were bigger, but nevertheless we have a little sample of a lot of different things.
In 1991, the family began working toward buying it. It wasn't easy. It had all been divvied up in a land scam, 2-acre lots that had long been tied up in lawsuits.
So there are scattered lots all through this that we don't own. But as you can tell looking around you, it's not even been surveyed. There's no access. It's not been surveyed. A lot of it's wetlands, and this can't be developed.
It is now a nature preserve called Forever Florida. The ranch and the preserve combined make up 47,000 acres. It's impressive, but Broussard is still buying land to keep in conservation. What is it like for you to be where you are today, viewing this land differently than you may have 30, 40 years ago?
Because of Alan, I know a lot, I understand things a lot better about natural ecosystems. Before we got started on this project especially, I was interested in conservation, and because really my father was that way too. But the difference in a cattleman, you see, a cattleman would see nothing wrong in grazing this land. And cattle, in terms of acreage affected, have done more environmental damage in this country than anything else because of overgrazing, especially in the large plains in the west, but also overgrazing this kind of land. There's about 30 different species of grasses here, and about 12 or 15 of those species cattle prefer.
Okay.
So they come along and select the ones they prefer to graze. And those that they don't want to graze gradually get the dominance, you see. So to preserve the systems intact, we can't allow cattle to be on this land. So this is not grazed, and it's a little hard for me to sell that idea to some of my cattleman friends, and the man who used to be my foreman here just never quite got that. To them, a nice preserved ecosystem is a green pasture of bahia grass.
Cows aren't allowed here, but people are. Forever Florida runs eco-tours through the preserve, giving people a chance to see what Florida was like even before the conquistadors.
Part of our mission, though, we felt was education. So we decided to start the eco-tour business to not only show people what was here, but give people a feeling for what natural systems are and how valuable they are. All through there is typical flatwoods. Flatwoods means an understory of palmetto and some shrubbery, mostly shiny lionia, and some gallberry, with an overstory of pine trees. So that's what the Spanish saw when they came here. And the land like this, all the native species are still here, we do believe. And some years we have just carpets of flowers. Next spring, if we get some rain, because we burned this year, this will be covered with wildflowers.
Interestingly, Forever Florida's eco-tours are most popular among Europeans, who make special trips here for a chance to see carpets of flowers, a black bear, or maybe even a Florida panther.
Well, it's one of the obvious economic values of a natural system, which we again fail to recognize. Not only fail to recognize, but even if we recognize it, we put no value on it. So you talk to an appraiser, a land appraiser, and that appraiser will put zero value on the best of natural systems, so that when the state is buying land to preserve it, the really well-preserved stuff like this, actually you don't get as much for it as if you turned it into ranch land and were getting ready to develop it. Then you get more money for it. So we do not put any value on this, but the Europeans do. They do put a value on it, and we've been on the BBC television at least 3 times, and from that we get visitors who come to Florida to come here. And one of the BBC programs was a program that is entitled The 50 Places You Want to Visit Before You Die, and we're number 26 on that list, and we think that's great. I mean, that's pretty good. And the Europeans who come here are just ecstatic with what they see.
While it might sometimes be hard to recognize how a dry prairie system interconnects with the Ocala scrub, the green swamp, and the Indian River Lagoon, ecotourism could provide an interconnection that goes beyond the subtleties of nature.
If you have an island, the number of species on that island is almost directly proportional to the area of that island. So the larger you can make the island, the more species you're going to have. And I think we pretty well are satisfied now that a good corridor makes it larger. That's no longer an island if you connect it by corridor to another natural area. And so the number of species increases by the square, what you'd have with smaller areas. So it's very, very important ecologically to do that. Besides that, if we could tie these areas together in some kind of a plan to bring people from Europe to see 2 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them, I mean, you could keep them here for a couple of weeks doing nothing but that. I know because I went to Africa and I saw what they're doing in Africa. And they're so far ahead of us in ecotourism. I mean, we're not even on the screen compared to Africa.
Broussard admits ecotourism is not something you venture into lightly. It takes real commitment, a commitment to the land.
One of the things that sets people apart that are really interested in protecting natural systems is that money is not as important to those people. Those people to whom money is the most important thing, and that's the majority of us, they don't care about protecting the natural system, they just want to make more money. And those of us that are really into this don't care that much about money. Money is just something to use to do something that's worthwhile.
There are lots of places you can go to experience the Kissimmee Prairie, and you can find out more by checking out the Naturally Central Florida report at these websites. We all understand that growth is coming our way, but more and more citizens are saying that we can do a better and smarter job of growing. We want to provide jobs and housing and still protect our quality of life. After all, that's most of what's attracting people to move here in the first place. And it's certainly what those of us who have lived here for many years care about. We don't have to lose the Florida we love to bulldozers. We don't have to put up with crowded roads and crowded schools. Let's find a way to grow on our terms, on terms that we, and more importantly, our children and our grandchildren can live with. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Naturally Central Florida.